The views and opinions of the guests of Veterans Archives do not reflect the views and opinions of Veterans Archives, its subsidiaries, or its partners. Hello and welcome to Veterans Archives. This is a podcast where you can learn about our military history in the words and voices of the men and women who lived and created it. I'm your host, Bill Krieger, and let's listen to our next story. It is Thursday, May 4th, 2023. I'm talking with Brian Brooks, who served in the Michigan National Guard. So, Brian, we're going to start out real simple and just talk about when and where were you born?
I was born in Rochester, Michigan, and I lived there, I think, till about 1 or 2 years old, and then we moved to Jackson, Michigan, and I grew up in Jackson and went to graduated from Jackson Lumen Christi, 1999. And from there, that's when I joined the military, the U.S. Army.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about what it was like growing up, Brian. So, what was your childhood like? What kind of stuff did you do?
My childhood was pretty good. I grew up playing hockey, travel hockey. So we were all around Michigan, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Indianapolis. So any place pretty much in the Midwest, doing hockey, me and my brother. I played soccer growing up as well, but hockey was more of our thing growing up. Lived in a neighborhood. My dad was an insurance salesman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom up until I was in high school. She became a teacher at Jackson Parma Western, and she retired about 7 years ago, and she passed away soon after that. So, okay.
Well, what drew you to hockey? Because I've noticed when people play hockey, they're like all in. No one's on the fence with hockey.
Yeah, so hockey, you have to be a very dedicated sport. I currently am a coach for my oldest son, Logan, who's 8. But what drew me to hockey, so my brother started playing before I did, my brother Pat. And he played soccer. My dad coached him for soccer, and there was 2 kids on the team. I believe it was Keith Boone and Rob Papard were their names, and they both played hockey. And the parents talked to my dad and got my brother into hockey, and then I was soon to follow after that. And hockey's one of those things that you just it's kind of an addiction. And my brother and I both were pretty quick. On the ice and on the field when we were playing soccer. So that definitely played pretty well in hockey. And we had a group of friends, and when you have a group of friends, you get more interested in it. And I see my son going through that right now because he has a couple friends down there that I can't wait to go see. So he's getting really into it. But yeah, it's hockey is... Back when I would play, we probably skated 3 to 4 times a week, where I think a lot of the kids around, or at least where we live now, skate 4 to 6 times a week. So and the kids and the parents are pretty dedicated to it. And it's just I guess it's like an addiction, and it's something that's fun to play.
Well, it's not only the kids that have to be dedicated, right? Mom and dad have to be pretty dedicated to it, I can imagine.
Oh yeah. It's a commitment. But, it's you look, I look back at my time growing up, and I look now and see my kids playing sports. It's it's fun, it's what I look forward to. When I get to go coach, it's, and see the kids get to how much fun they're having. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. Can't beat it.
So did you just have one brother, or did you have brothers and sisters or any other siblings?
I had one brother. He still lives in Jackson. Mm-hmm. He's 2 years older than me. He is, I think 44 right now. But yeah, we talk pretty much every day, and he's involved with Logan, my oldest, and Isaac, my youngest. They're hockey when he can be. So we still talk quite a bit.
Were you guys competitive growing up?
We were very competitive growing up.
Did that carry over into adulthood at all?
No, we are a little bit, I think, here and there, but not really, because, I mean, he was in insurance, and now he's like a facilities manager, and I went in the military, so we didn't really, like, compete at all. We were just always kind of there for each other.
So did he follow your father into insurance?
He did. He did follow my dad had an insurance agency in Jackson, had his own building. And he basically, my brother worked for him for a long period of time. My mom worked for him for a long period of time at a building on West Michigan, kind of over by Westwood Mall, if you're familiar with Jackson at all. But he later, I mean, he retired probably like 10 years ago, somewhere around there. But he did insurance for like 34 years, I think.
So you probably knew just about everybody in Jackson at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, he knows a lot of people in Jackson. He insured everybody.
Yeah. So you go to school, you play a lot of hockey, you play some soccer, you get through high school, and like you said, that's kind of when the military came about. So let me ask first, like, when did you join, and then why did you join? What was the reason?
So I joined. I talked to like 2 or 3 schools for soccer, to go to college for soccer, and I was talking to one for hockey, but I mean they were like D3, D2 schools. They weren't very big, and honestly, I didn't really have like any focus. I feel like at that time in my life, I was doing a lot of things. I was going in a bad direction. I was hanging out with kids who weren't going in a good direction. They now are in a good direction, but back then they were not. And I was one of them. So I mean, I wasn't perfect, and they were bad. We were all bad. So, anyhow, I growing up, I always was playing guns in the woods, and that was always like G.I. Joe was big back then.
Right.
So like we had the aircraft carrier, the huge one. I remember my dad putting it together. But I've always wanted to join. And I think back then it seemed like it might have been a little bit frowned upon. Mm-hmm. And this is 1999 when I graduated. So I feel like it was frowned upon in my school. I don't think they really frowned upon it, but I mean, no one, like barely anybody from my school joined.
Right. They wanted everyone to go to college, right?
Correct.
And it sounds to me like you just weren't ready for that.
No, I wasn't ready for it. I don't think that if I would have gone to college at that point in time, I think I would have failed out of college. If I went, I would have partied too much or something like that. So, but I knew, I was always in the woods. I'd never shot a gun at all until I joined, but I was always in the woods. I always like watched every war movie that was ever out. I would literally go to war movies by myself. Cause I like the military. So, but I joined 1999. I remember like me being a recruiter at the end of my career. I always would say like I was a recruiter's dream. I walked in, I was qualified. I could pass everything. There was no like, you didn't have to sell me on it. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And as long as I was qualified, I was going to join. Mm-hmm. So I joined out of the Jackson Crossing Mall at the Armed Forces Center. I don't know if it's called that, but there was Navy. Yeah,
they had all the branches were like in one spot. Yeah, and you could just go door to door and figure out where you wanted to go.
Yeah, and I went in the Navy, I went in the Air Force, and I went in the Marines. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't. I remember the best feeling I had was in the Army. So, nothing against those other branches, but I had a better feeling about what I wanted to, like they could tell me what I wanted to do.
Right.
And, I had an option of what I wanted to do more so than I did in the other branches. But I went to, Jackson Crossing, and then I went to, I joined out of Lansing MEPS. And I remember I forget what I scored on the ASVAB, but I didn't try very hard. I remember that.
Just enough to get in, right?
Just enough to get in. I think I was well above that. But,
yeah.
And I remember going to MEPS and taking the test. And I remember I went back like a week after that. I didn't do like all in one, but I went back like a week after that, and I remember going through the physical, and then I went into the guidance counselor, which is the person who would write the job or sign your contract. And back then it was a typewriter.
Oh yeah.
And
I remember those.
I remember I still have my contract at home. And I remember like them typing that out, and they said, well, we can do 13 Bravo artillery cannon crew member, and you can go to Hawaii. And I said, well, that's what I want. So they barely even explained it to me, and they said, you know, you're going to be in the field a lot, which sounded great to me because I like being in the woods. And they were like, you're going to get to blow a lot of stuff up, and that was even better. So filled up what I wanted, and I signed the contract, and I want to say it was like July 27th of 1999, and I shipped to training, basic training of September 17th of 1999. And my training was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I graduated from, I want to say it's like January 19th of 2000. And while I was there, I was in the 1st to 40th, Alpha 1st to 40th. And some of the things that I won the high APFT Army Physical Fitness test. So I got like a 348 out of 300. And that's probably the best shape I've ever been in my life.
I think anyone that's a veteran, that phrase comes out of your mouth at some point.
Yeah.
It's the best shape I was ever in. I want to back up a little bit, though. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. And I want to ask you this. You know, you were ready to go. You obviously found the job that you wanted. You ship off. I want to talk a little bit about basic training and what that was like that first moment that you got there. What was that like for you?
I'd say the first, so I'd never been away from home other than for like a hockey tournament on a weekend. So I never left my mom. And I remember I was pretty emotional, like leaving my parents. And when I got there and you get on you go to replacement, and you start checking in, you start doing all your medical stuff, and it's just kind of like boring. You get boring until you get all your gear, and you start putting your gear on, like, oh, this is real and this is awesome. And then I remember getting on the cattle truck, which is a truck that it looks like cattle would be in it, but
I think they literally were cattle cars.
I think
like they were didn't even feel like they were converted. Like you could be in there and a cow could be in there the next day.
Yeah. It smelled like there was a cow in there before I walked in. But I remember I had like 3 bags, and everybody was trying to pile into this thing, and the drill sergeants were like yelling at you the whole time. And they now call it shark attack. I don't think they do them anymore, but I remember them being in your face and just yelling at you and yelling at you, which I look back, like back then, like, oh no. And now I look back and I like laugh at it. And I think it was a cool experience,
Right.
as bad as it might have been. And I remember just getting on there and then us going across the tracks. I remember them smoking us, which, doing physical fitness for a couple hours, and them yelling and yelling and yelling for like the first week. And, yeah, I mean, that's what I remember more than anything. And I want to say the first I think BRM or basic rifle marksman was week 4. And that was the first time I ever shot a weapon.
Uh-huh.
And I went out there and I shot, and I got like a 36, which is like out of 40, which was really good as expert.
Right.
And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to be really good at this. And then I went out there and shot again, and I could barely pass. So I was probably one of the worst marksmen in the military. But I was really good at physical fitness. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I thrived. And they literally would we would compete against others throughout the cycle. And I remember I would just like, I beat them like pretty bad. Like there wasn't anybody who even came within 50 points of me in most of the stuff.
They really like that stuff in the military too, right? Like you don't have to be the best person ever, but if you can do the APFD, you're like a superhero.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, and you sit there and you're like, this guy could be terrible at his job, but he can do physical fitness.
Oh yeah, he's a stud.
Yeah. So, but I remember that being probably my highlight is the physical fitness. But I really loved shooting when we would shoot and throwing grenades. I remember throwing the grenade and tossing it over this concrete wall and feeling the explosion, like getting that. And then I remember going through the obstacle courses, and that was basic training was fun. And, as a recruiter, I would always tell people, like, I know you're scared of it, but it'll be some of the most fun you've had in your life. And it literally was some of the most fun. Like, you don't get to do that if you don't join.
Right.
I'm not trying to sound like a recruiter in my interview, but.
Well, I think though, it kind of reminds me of like when you're in high school and your parents say, "Oh, this is the best time of your life. Enjoy it." And you're like, you are so full of crap. But then you look back 10 years later and you're like, oh, that really was the best time of my life. I really did have a great time. And I think to me, basic training was a lot like that. Did you make, some friends there, some people that you still stay in contact with at all?
So back then their cell phones weren't even out yet. And if you had a cell phone, you were a drug dealer.
Right. Not a lot of those in basic.
No. So there was you had to go to a payphone with a calling card and call home. So as far as basic training, I have not communicated with anybody from basic training since I was in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And this sounds really bad. So everybody that I was in basic training with who went to Hawaii, which there is a group, all of them were either they went AWOL or they somehow got out.
Oh, okay.
I was the only one left, which was I do remember that, but Adam Kirby was one that I hung out with. Brad Koblenz. Those are the two that I remember that I hung out with the most when I was in basic. And I have never tried to find. I think I've tried to find Adam Kirby on Facebook, but it never came up.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you get to basic training, you do your thing there. It sounds like things went pretty well for you. Mm-hmm. Then you head to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It sounds like you did a great job in AIT. Is there anything like you really remember about AIT? That like a story, like when you think about AIT, this is what you think about?
I would say that, like, I'm trying to think of something funny. And I remember that, like, we would get food and we would stick it. Like, we had like a drop ceiling and we'd put like what we call pogey bait in the ceiling. And I remember we went through probably about a month of doing it, and finally we got caught. And then when we got caught, it was like, uh-oh. Right. All hell broke loose with drill sergeant. So, I mean, there's other things that happened that were funny, but I remember that more than anything. The drill sergeants, after a while, became more comedians than they were, like, mean, because we all joked around about it. I mean, some of the stuff they would say was just like...
Well, I'm pretty sure you guys weren't the first people to stick stuff up in the ceiling either. It's not like they were surprised to find that there.
No, and I'm sure that they've had it happen every cycle, and they probably waited. It's like they waited on it just for the right time to go up and check. But yeah, I remember that they were pretty funny towards the end of it.
Yeah,
or probably halfway through.
So about how long were you at Fort Sill?
I was 17 weeks, so we were one station unit training. So we had basic training, same barracks for 17 weeks. And when we'd start AIT was, we got to go shoot cannons, and I worked on a M198 and M119er, and 198 is 155 millimeter shell.
Uh-huh.
119er is 105 millimeter shell, and then I got to do a couple things with the 109, which is no longer in use, which is also a 155 shell. But I remember doing that, and doing that was a blast. Like just shooting, like you could see, like Oklahoma's so like
It's
bare,
really flat,
and like you can see miles and miles because there's not a lot of trees. Well, there are trees, but not like where we live.
Right.
And you could see the explosion when it, like the impact. And I remember seeing that the first time and seeing it go out of the tube. I'm like, I'm supposed to be here. This is awesome.
You have found your station in life at that point.
Yeah.
So when you got all done with AIT, I heard something about Hawaii. So did you come back home first, or did you just go right to Hawaii after AIT? What was that all about?
So in basic training, I do remember I had like a 2-week Christmas exodus, which we were charged leave, and then I came back and did like recruiting, hometown HRAP, hometown recruiting. Mm-hmm. So I came back, and then I went to Hawaii, and I remember coming back and going to Hawaii, and it was like freezing cold in Michigan. And when I went there, it was like 85, 90 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm going to live in this. So I felt pretty good. But yeah, I left for Hawaii, and I think the end of January, early February of 2000.
And then how long were you in Hawaii for?
I was in Hawaii from that point, so 2000, January, February 2000 to August of 2002. So I mean, it was a 3-year tour, but if you had basic training on top of that, it was a little less than that. And when I left Hawaii, I left a little early just because I got what you call a school drop, because I got accepted to Lansing Community College, and I was going to go to school. So they let me leave like a month early. I got it approved to do that.
So what kinds of things were you doing in Hawaii? I mean, other than having a great time, because it's Hawaii.
Yeah. So in Hawaii, I worked on a M119er howitzer, which is, again, the 105 millimeter shell. And we did everything, like as far as training goes, we would do... So Hawaii's like air assault central. So like you would go, like when I say air assault, that means like picking up sling loads and taking a howitzer plus rounds from one location to another one on a helicopter. We worked with UH-60s, and we worked with CH-47 Chinooks. But I would rarely go to the field and not be on a helicopter. Mm-hmm. So I spent a ton of time on helicopters, to the degree where I actually went to air assault school and in East Range, Hawaii. I don't know if it's a town called East Range, but we called it East Range. And it rained and rained and rained. It was like gulches and nothing but tropical climate. And but we did sling loads, and we fired rounds, and there you could also see the impact. It would like impact on a mountain. Mm-hmm. So you could see the impact zone. Training was like up all night. Like you didn't sleep very much. We trained on Oahu. Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, on Oahu, and we also trained at Pahakaloa training area, which was the Big Island. So it's in between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, and we go from 85 to 90 degree weather to Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, Pahakaloa training area, or PTA as we called it. And there's like, it's extremely cold. It gets down to like 25 to 30 degrees at night, or around there. It felt colder than that because we were used to the climate.
Well, you don't think it's going to get that cold in Hawaii.
No.
Right?
And like it was one of the coolest places I've been. And the reason is that you could, like, we had some downtime and we did some direct fire. I think as far as training goes, like the direct fire is like where you lower the tube and you shoot a 105 millimeter shell at a truck trailer out in this field, and you see it like hit and explode, which was awesome. If I could do it over again, I would do it over again. But it was super cool. But after the training was over in Pahakaloa, or PTA, we there's an observatory like an hour from where you're stationed when you go out there. It's like a 30-day tour. I think I did it like 2 or 3 times. And there's observatories that you can see, like it's very, very high. I don't know the exact height of it. But you can see like other islands, and it's actually where they view planets and stars and stuff like that. Yeah. So that when I say observatory, it's for like people observing stars. But they say that area is the closest thing to Mars on planet Earth.
Really?
Yeah. And you can actually ski in Hawaii. And when we went up there, like there was snow. Like I was literally throwing snowballs at some of my comrades.
I never would have guessed. I mean, you never hear about a snowball fight in Hawaii.
No. Well, I had one. I guarantee you that.
You got a great story there.
Yeah, it was fun. But as far as Oahu was pretty cool. Like off time we went to Waikiki a lot. And, back then I was 19 through 21. I think I turned 22 when I was out there. And we went to Waikiki, and we went to a bar. The main bar we went to was Moose McGillicuddy's, which is not only there, I think it's in San Diego as well. But that was like there's like a military bar in Waikiki. So in Hawaii, some of the areas, like if you're a soldier, you have to, or a service member at all, you have to be careful on where you go in Hawaii, because some of the places in Hawaii are not where you want.
Some people don't like the military there.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And there are reasons, like in their defense, there's some people that kind of ruin our name, but that doesn't mean everybody. Right. But yeah, we hung out a bar called Moose McGillicuddy's, or Scruples, and I enjoyed the time there. Like the Waikiki was fun. North Shore was super nice. Waimea Beach, Waimea Falls,
Waimea Canyon.
Yeah. Yep. So Waimea Canyon might be on the Big Island.
Actually, you know what? I think it's on Kauai.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on Kauai, actually. So you're right, yeah.
Yeah, so
apparently Waimea is a very popular name over there.
Yeah. It's it's just a beautiful island. Yeah. And I had an aunt that lived out there, and cousins. I only saw them like twice when I was there in 3 years. But back then I would train and then go party. And that's kind of...
You were that age.
Yeah, I was that age, and that's what we did.
Yeah.
But they lived in... My aunt, her husband was a retired colonel, or lieutenant colonel, one of the two, in the Army, and he was artillery. I don't think I ever met him growing up, but I had met her quite a few times. And he was buried at a place called Punahou, or not Punahou. There was a military cemetery out there, and he was buried there. I can't think of the name right off the top of my head, but it was, he was buried there. And then my cousins lived in Punahou, and my aunt lived in, not Kauai. but they lived on the windward side, which was like the opposite side from where I lived. And it's where the Marine, Kaneohe, she lived in Kaneohe. So Kaneohe Bay, which is a super pretty area. And it's where the Marine Corps base and Navy base is, but it's super pretty. And then my cousins, they lived in Punahou. And like I said, I only saw them like twice when I was out there. A very pretty island. I had a really good experience out there. And some of the people I hung out with there were a guy named Chris Pear. And he actually came to, when I lived in Lansing, Michigan, he came out and visited. And then a Mike Deathridge. And I think both of them ended up being E9s, sergeant majors at the end of their career. I haven't spoken to any one of them in like 10 years. But, I was in Mike's wedding in Oklahoma City. And then Chris, I talked to him every now and then. But those were the main two that I hung out with in Hawaii.
Oh, okay. All right. And so you do your time there, you get accepted to Lansing Community College, and it's time to get off active duty, and then you came back home?
Yep. So I came back home. I came back home and I lived in Jackson with my dad for a couple months. Then I moved to East Lansing. I lived at a place they're still there, called Norwood Apartments.
Very familiar.
On Grand River.
Uh-huh.
And I lived by myself, and it was great. And I ended up coming back, and I joined a fraternity my first semester as a Delta Sigma Phi, and they're almost right next to Norwood Apartments. And so I was a pledge for a semester, and I became a brother. And a lot of my college time was there. Mm-hmm. And I had a anniversary in January at the MSU, the Federal Credit Union Club, I think is what it's called, which is like, it's in Spartan Stadium and it overlooks the stadium, which is a super cool venue. But anyhow, I still communicate with all my fraternity brothers. I talked to one on my way here, actually. So I'm in one the other day, and I'm probably going to talk to one tomorrow. But so most of my time at Michigan State was spent at the Delta Sig house. Again, at that stage of life, I just kind of partied a lot, and I still went to school, but it didn't really work. I lived off the GI Bill.
Right. So you got a degree, though, from Michigan State?
No, my degree came from Spring Arbor University.
Okay.
So I think I got to about 70 credits through Lansing Community College and Michigan State. I was like kind of back and forth.
Yeah, like a dual enrollment.
Dual enrollment.
Yeah.
And I ended up started doing funeral honors. Well, I got to back up a little bit, because while I was at Michigan State, I was there for about a year, and then I got deployed to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I was there, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I was at MDay, 1 weekend a month in the National Guard, re-enlisted from Hawaii into the National Guard artillery. I was a gunner, which means that I basically aimed the gun for howitzer on an M109. And we deployed to Cuba. And when I deployed to Cuba, that was December 3rd of 2003. I was promoted to Sergeant E5 in December of 2003.
So I want to back up just a little bit so that we kind of get the whole story. So you're going to school. At what point did you decide to join the National Guard? Was that like right when you came back?
So I re-enlisted. So from Army, you can re-enlist.
So you never really got out of the military.
No.
You just went, okay.
I had no break in service whatsoever. Okay. I re-enlisted, raised my hand. Mm-hmm. My commander from the Army swore me into the Army National Guard.
Okay. I got you.
And so when I came back, I got like 2 or 3 months off, and then I reported. And I worked out of Charlotte and Albion, so 119th. I was Charlie 119th Field Artillery. And it was a huge change. I literally remember going to the field, and I had a section chief. His name was Miguel Cortez, and so I was a gunner. He was the chief, and I remember we fired our first round. It's my first round on a M109. We fired it, and he turned around and he grabbed a. I can say this because he's out now.
Right.
I turn around and I see him look. There's like an ammo rack behind where the cannon was,
Mm-hmm.
and we never used it for ammo, but we definitely used it for. He used it for whiskey.
Uh-huh.
So we fired, and he grabbed like a fifth of whiskey, and he took a drink of it, and he's like, "Hey, you want some?" I'm like, "Are you crazy? We're firing a howitzer." But so it was a pretty big transition.
Oh yeah, it's a completely different ball game.
Yeah, into the National Guard, which took me a little bit of time to accept that and kind of embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I deployed, we got orders to deploy, and when I deployed, I really noticed how great the National Guard was. Every branch has its strengths and weaknesses,
right.
And I feel like the Army was really good at training and getting things down quickly and all of that. But when you came into the National Guard, there was so much life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a 21, 22-year-old kind of cocky individual, I was,
well, did you find that, so active duty, you're right. There's this mindset on active duty. There's this other mindset in the National Guard. So you talked about the guy drinking whiskey, you're out, shooting rounds. But on the flip side, I think you're getting to this. When you deployed, it's all that stuff that doesn't seem to really work, right? How are we doing this in the National Guard that we didn't do in the Army? But then when you deploy, it's all that stuff comes together,
mm-hmm.
and it actually makes us better at deploying, I think.
Yeah.
It makes the National Guard a little bit better at deploying sometimes than the straight Army, because you have all those people that have all this experience outside of the military that they bring to the table when they come to the military. So when you got out of active duty and you came to school, I want to ask a couple questions about that. So it may feel like we're skipping around a little bit, but this whole thing will come together. When you got to school, so you're a little bit older than the average person just starting out in college. Did you find that your military experience and your age and your life experience helped you or hindered you, or both?
I think in some cases, so the one thing I remember, so I was an early bird. I always woke up. I always worked out in the morning. That was just how I did things. And when I went to college, it probably took me about a semester or two to where all my friends would say, so when I got here, all my friends that I graduated high school with were seniors. So it was their last year, the ones that were at MSU. So I joined a fraternity to be around people. So, they're most of the people I hung out with in the fraternity were 2 years younger than me. So,
mm-hmm.
It's not really that big of a difference.
Probably didn't have the same life experiences that you had.
No, they did not. And when I came there, it was I was around, I had the Army, and they'd been in school, and their experience outside of high school was partying.
Right.
And a lot of them, I remember this more than anything. A lot of the people that I hung out with, their parents were a lot more involved than mine were,
mm-hmm.
in what their decisions were, and their finances, and you're a young kid,
right? You'd been on your own for 3 years.
I'd been on my own for 3 years, and being there in college, I remember that none of them would make a decision about anything without their parents being involved, and I think I was kind of 3 years past that, which isn't that long.
Right, but long enough to scratch your head that they had to call mom and dad every time they wanted to do something. Right?
Yeah, and some of them would go. I remember some of them would go to the bar, and here I am. I'm using my GI Bill at the bar.
Right.
And I remember going to the bar and like some of them were using their parents' credit card. I'm like buying everybody shots or something. I'm like, they're like, yeah, my parents are buying. And I'm like, that's awesome. Get another round.
Right. Do mom and dad know that they're buying rounds for everybody? Because they're going to find out.
Yeah, they don't know that.
Right.
But I feel like I was a little bit ahead of them, but they were like, don't get me wrong, they were like academically way smarter than me. Mm-hmm. So it took me a little while, and like, although I don't want to, like a lot of them I leaned on for academic support. So,
right. Right. Well, it's a different world, different life experiences. So you kind of have this parallel lives going on, your military life and your civilian life, and it seems like they came together with your deployment to Guantanamo Bay. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that deployment was all about and what that was like?
So that deployment was about, I think we left and trained up in New Jersey, Fort Dix, New Jersey. And we were an artillery unit. So everybody was artillery or supported artillery. And when we went to Cuba, we were going to be basically corrections officers. Right. So I believe that the MOS was like 31 kilo at the time. So we went to Fort Dix, and we were there for like 30 days. And they literally built a fake prison, and we went through and like shackled prisoners and. Mm-hmm. And 3-piece suits, 1-piece suits. We did cell extractions, which mean like somebody wouldn't come out of their cell, so we'd have to go and train on it. Go get them out of their cell, and there's like a procedure for that. And so finally, I think we hit ground in Cuba. So you go and keep in mind we're in New Jersey, and there was a ton of snow, and it was super cold, and we were always training outside. Then we go to Cuba, and it's like 90 degrees. So it's like we get there and we're all sweating, and
right. You weren't prepared for this.
No. And we went there, and the first day we were there, I'm pretty sure we were on the block, which was like a really, really weird experience. So on the block, there was usually 48 detainees or people who were captured during like when we went to Iraq and Afghanistan for a variety of reasons. All of them said that they were students for the most part, from what I remember. And I want to say what I can say without like saying too much. Mm-hmm. But they were all detained for some type of reason, not determined by me or anybody there, right, but by somebody in another country, like from another country. And our job was to guard them. Basically, we would feed them, take them to shower and rec. So they have like a rec yard that they could go kick a soccer ball around in. They'd take a shower outside. Then we'd feed them like 3 times a day. And I also did the cell extraction team. I think I had probably had one of the most of anybody who went. I was a cell extraction like leader, so I was like it was a brand new E5 then, and so I was always in charge of cell extractions. And for some reason, every time I went into a cell, the detainee would fight back, and I don't know why that was. I just like luck. I don't know, but
they just didn't like you for some reason. Huh?
Yeah. Well, there's usually like 9 times out of 10. They would just lay down just because they wanted attention and they wanted something. So they would lay down and not come out of their cell. But they would lay down and you go get them and take them out, search their cell, and then put them back in. And they don't get what they want. But for some reason, every time I would go in, almost, say 80% of the time, they were always fighting back. Mm-hmm. And it just happened to be like my shift when they did that. And I remember going in like ISO blocks where there's like walls where all the other cells were open. There was, so like the wind would go through them. They had roofs and everything, but like you could, like the wind would go through them. It was completely open.
Right.
Other than like the cage in between each one. They're like really small cages. so you couldn't like stick your hand through them or anything, but they would shoot OC spray or pepper spray. Mm-hmm. Military calls it OC spray, but they would spray the detainee, and we'd go in and we had to wrestle them down and take them out and get them to calm down and ask them what's going on. I mean, we were doing the right thing. It might not sound like it, but we were basically trying to get them to calm down from whatever they're upset about. And so I did quite a few while I was down there. I also was the interrogation security. So I did that. This kind of depended on the shift you were on. Like sometimes you would get that and that's what you were assigned. Mm-hmm. So everybody down there would do it a little bit. So we basically have like FBI agents, CIA agents would interrogate, and we were like the security. So, but other than that, while I was there, I worked out all the time, and that's all you really had to do. And I remember a lot of the guys I was down there with, they got like their scuba diving certificate, which was, and some of the stuff they would bring home was insane. I remember a guy bringing a crab like 2 feet long back, and I was like, holy smokes, that's the biggest crab I've ever seen.
That's huge.
Yeah. So, but I think Cuba, like when I was down there, that's when I really learned how unique the National Guard was. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm not like trying to promote the National Guard. It's the strength.
Well, that's just your experience.
Yeah. The strength that the National Guard had was like life experience. And I remember my section chief at the time, or squad leader, was Sergeant Bill Winbury. And I talked to him a couple years ago. He works at TACOM in Warren. I know that, doing like supply, but I talked to him. One of my roommate was Tom McAuliffe for a while. And and those are the two I remember the most. Joe Gregory, he was our platoon sergeant. I still talk to him every now and then. I mean, those guys I deployed with, if I see them, I always stop and talk to them. So, but a lot of them are still around Michigan. Mm-hmm. But those were the like three that I probably communicated with the most, or have like seen the most of since we've not been there. But yeah, it was a good experience. I just remember like the life experience that they brought. And like as a new E5, I'm really glad that was my experience, because had it been in the Army, I feel like I remember like my E5 in the Army, and it was all yelling. It was all like, go do this because I said so. And I feel like when I became an E5, that's when like it started to shift a little bit, and shift from being like, go do this because I said so, to like, hey, this is why you're doing it. I want this to make sense to you. And I had a really good E6, and I had a really good E7, and a lot of other E6s and E7s that were there. I'm really glad that I was an E5 with that, and not with like the old. Not that the old was bad, just that's the way it was then.
Right. I mean, you get two lessons no matter what. You either get a lesson on how to do it or a lesson on how not to do it. Mm-hmm. But there's really no kind of, I don't think, in between on that, right? So it sounds like as an E5, you got the lessons on how to do it. Now, how long were you in Guantanamo Bay?
We were there from early January to, I think we left in October, but we didn't get home until like, I think I got home on like November 3rd or 4th, but was still on orders till like November 30th or something like that.
So when you deployed, you hadn't finished school yet, or had you?
I had not finished school.
So it interrupted school. So you got back after that period of time. Did you go back to school, or what happened when you got back?
So I did go back to school. So before I left, I came into school for business, and I eventually switched to aviation. Mm-hmm. So I when I was doing aviation, I used to fly out of Lansing Capital City Airport, and we'd fly around runway 10. But I remember, like, so I started with that, and then when we went down there, I came back, and I just stayed with business. Mm-hmm. The one thing I do want to mention that one of the big things that happened while I was down there. So my now wife, mm-hmm. I dated prior to leaving for Guantanamo Bay for like that summer, which her and I still say was the best summer of our lives. Some days she might agree with that. Some days she might not.
It just depends on the day.
Depends on the day.
Yeah.
But we had a ton of fun, and then I went to Cuba, and I think we broke up after the summer because I came back to East Lansing. But while I was in Cuba, she emailed me pretty much every day. Mm-hmm. And then my fraternity brothers, while I was in Cuba, one of them emailed me pretty much every day. So I had a lot of support from my wife and all my fraternity brothers while I was down there.
Well, that's good. That's important. Yeah, away from home,
super important. And when I remember coming back to East Lansing, I came back in November, so I couldn't start school. But I could definitely hang out with everybody and coming back to that. And they actually did an article on me. MSU newspaper. I forget the
State News.
State News.
Yeah.
Yes. There you go. State News. And they did it. And I remember when they did it, it was November, and there was like one of like the Middle Eastern leaders mm-hmm. passed away, and I was like front page. My buddy Cody, who I literally talked to today, Cody Dawson, got me on the front page of State News. Like, so there's a big picture of me in like an article about me getting back from Cuba, and like a huge world leader passes away, and I'm like the number one focal point for the news that day, which is crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'll take it. But
right.
But yeah, I mean, it was coming back and having like that support was great. And then I started back at LCC, and I ended up playing hockey for LCC for that semester. And I don't think we lost. We were one of my buddies, Brian Forward. He played on the team, and my brother got in touch with him and told him that I wanted to play. So I started playing Lansing Community College.
Yeah,
and then soon after that, I started doing military funeral honors. So I started that. I get back November of 2004. Mm-hmm. And May of 2005, I started doing funerals. It was right after the semester ended. Uh-huh. I started doing military funerals, and there might have been a little bit of within a couple months of that.
Yeah.
And I started doing military funerals as like an M-Day, so I'd go to school, and then I'd go do funerals like when I wasn't in class.
Yeah.
And I got like Arlington certified, so we called it. And so I became a trainer, so I'd train other people on how to do a funeral. And I did quite a few soldiers killed in action during that time frame. And but I got hired on. I was always in school during that time. Then I got hired full time for the Honor Guard as active duty operational support for, I think it was in May of 2006. So May of 2006, I was hired. Although I worked full time for them, I wasn't considered active duty full time. So I was hired then as a supply clerk. So we were switching from Army greens, if you remember this.
Oh yes,
to the Army dress blues.
Yep.
But the whole Army wasn't switching yet, but the Honor Guard was switching. So I basically would fit everybody, and I would order their stuff, to go do a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
So dress blues, awards. So it's kind of my thing. So I was a supply guy, and I had a supply room was at the basement of the armory and Marshall Street Armory, if you remember that.
Yes. Yep. Marshall Street in Lansing, just down between Saginaw and Michigan Avenue.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So I was in the basement of there, and it was, a government building. I remember it was so hot in there. So like government building, it's either too cold or it's too hot.
Right. It's never perfect.
No. And it was super hot. So I did supply clerk for a while, and then I also did training on top of that. And I worked for, he eventually became Sergeant Major Merkel, but Brian Merkel. And I saw him a couple years ago, but yeah, so I did that, and I ended up doing, there's more to my time there, but I did funeral honors for a little over 10 years. And I think I ended up with like over 1,500 funeral services or burials, and quite a few color guards. I did operations for all the services that would come in. So basically Fort Knox would send us services, like, so somebody would pass away here in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
The funeral home would call Fort Knox, and Fort Knox would call me, and I would say, yes, we can handle it. Yes, we cannot. Or no, we cannot. So I basically would determine whether we can support what they're looking for this service. Right. But in that, we had, like, I was on call for anybody killed in action.
So casualty notification.
Yep. I wasn't the notifier. I was the funeral details. So I was certified for notification. Like, I went through the course and casualty assistance officer, but I never ended up doing one. But going through that course made me better at my job. So, but I worked with every one of them, and I worked with the families. So I had a lot of experience with, like, families, like working with families and talking to families of, like, somebody who was killed in action.
Right.
Or suicide was a huge one.
How'd that impact you? I mean, your whole job really is all about people dying.
Yeah, I mean, it affected me quite a bit. It still affects me today. Yeah. So, and I'm glad I did it, but it was worth as part of my journey. So. Right.
No, I get it. It has to be done, but it's not easy.
Let's take a quick break.
Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on donations from our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and would like to support our continued efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the donate button. Thank you.
Yeah, and like, I look back at a lot of the things I did in my career, and that was like, people would say, like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't think about it. I just, like, it had to be done. It was like, I would tell myself, this is the most honorable thing to do. And I remember going into planes, like, with a KIA, and I remember, like, I was probably like 5 years in. I remember we would have to open the casket and then drape it with the flag. And, and I remember, like, going in there twice with one of the guys who was my friend, and another gal who used to work for me, or soldier. And I remember they couldn't even, like, move because they would, like, freeze. And, like, I just had, like, no emotion towards it. And like, I look back and, like, that wasn't, like, it affected me later on, which, any advice that I would give anyone would be, go through it.
Right. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, though, you don't realize you're going through it. And then it's when it all calms down. Mm-hmm. Like when you're, no one else is around, or you're in the shower, or you're in bed, or whatever it is. At least in my experience, that's when it comes back. Like when you're in the middle of it, you can do anything. It's when you're not in the middle of it that's difficult. And I can tell by your voice and your reaction that it's still very real for you.
Oh yeah. So like I have, sorry for my emotions, but it's like I have dreams about funerals that I did 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And like I could still see the face of the family, still see the person that I picked up, like opening the casket. Like I could see all that still today. And it's like, I got to go through it.
Right. Right.
You know, so it's,
I mean, what you did really helped those families. I mean, what you did really mattered. I mean, it was very important that those people were taken care of, the families and the soldiers. And so as emotional as that is for you, you did something pretty amazing to help every single one of those families. You know, whether they said anything or not, you helped them through a very difficult time. But yeah, you got to feel it, and you got to get through it, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't ever forget it.
Yeah, and you don't, and you know, like I've been through counseling, and I've been through you know anything that's been recommended. And I remember going through it at the time, and I'd have these panic attacks, and I would just be like around when I was doing a lot of them,
right?
And I would wake up like I couldn't sleep, you know, and it was just like nightmare after nightmare. And finally I got help, which, you know, if anybody's listening to this, go get help if you need it. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right. I mean, it's help for a reason.
Yeah.
It's a lot weaker to not get help.
I
honestly.
agree.
Right.
I agree.
And I think that, also that, it's hard for people to wrap their head around this, but you go and get help. It doesn't mean it's over. It just means you know how to deal with it. Right. Like the emotion doesn't necessarily leave. The thoughts don't necessarily go away, but you learn first of all, you learn that it's kind of normal to feel that way. And second, I think you learn that, you learn to deal with it. You don't ever necessarily get rid of it.
No. And I don't want to get rid of it. You know,
right.
It's like, I want to embrace it and know like I can help someone else who's going through it. And, I don't think I know like there's guys who've been to Iraq like 2 or 3 times, and it's like I don't ever feel like I've done what they've done. But I mean, I know that my feeling is that I remember like almost every one of them. Mm-hmm. And I remember like I have moments where I'm like someplace that I can still, like, I can have that feeling just like that, you know, and it's like I can remember and my mind will go back to it.
Right.
And, one of the things that there's just certain situations that will just trigger, like, I remember like going to them, you'd like be so tense. Mm-hmm. And like you're getting there and you just like, you're so tense, but you got to be like that professional in front of the family. And like I remember like tensing up when I would go to a service and picking up a body, you know, coming off a plane, or doing like standing there. I remember going to Traverse City, and we picked up someone who's killed in Iraq, and they had a kid. They had a baby, like brand new newborn baby. And I remember the grandmother coming out with the baby and saying, "This is your dad." And it's like I remember having like just being so tense for those situations. And there's many more. But I mean, 1,500. And I look back and I'm really proud that I went through that. And, you know, I trained a lot of people to do that job, and it's very honorable, and it's very, I mean, there's people that I've trained that are still doing it, which is great. You know, there's people don't realize how many like people are pass away who served. Right. I think nationwide, the last time I checked, and it's probably increased since then, there was around 116 to 120,000 nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
I know back when I started doing funerals, we weren't as big and we weren't as trained. And I remember like we created a plan to train people. And I remember like what it was to what it is now, and some of the things we did like right off the bat that we didn't do at the end of it. So we just kind of, unless you were like in a leadership spot, you really didn't talk to family as much
Mm-hmm.
as you would if you were like an E4 or below.
Right.
So, but I'm extremely proud of that. I still have friends that I communicate with. As a matter of fact, when I started at Consumers, one of my friends from that referred me. So, yeah, it was, I'm very proud of that time in service. And I think it's one of the highest honors that I could have had.
Well, and I think this is important too for people to realize is that a lot of times we talk about veterans in the context of, did you go to combat? Were you in Iraq? Were you in wherever? Depending on when you served. If you served in the Vietnam era, if you served in World War II, if you served in Korea, where were you at? And there are thousands and thousands of people who served in the military honorably, that did lots of jobs that were very difficult to do, never went to combat. They're no less a veteran than anyone else. Like that job that you just talked about, that's really hard. Like that's not easy. Yeah, maybe no one was shooting at you, but it's a different kind of stress. It's a different kind of difficulty. And I think it's very important for anyone listening to understand that being a veteran isn't just about grabbing a gun and going out and shooting at people or getting shot at. There's so much more to being a veteran than that. And the services that you provided were so important and necessary. And it took a toll on you. And I think a lot of people who serve do it honorably, do the hard thing. And at some point there's a price to be paid for that. And just in what you've said, I can see that. And, it's a long time to do funeral honors.
10
That's
years,
a long time, to do that. And so when did you finally kind of get out of that?
So while I was doing it, I know we talked about my education.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was doing services, I remember I met the girl that I wanted to marry, which is now my wife. And, I remember like I started dating her and we started going to a church called Spring Arbor. And when I met her, I was like, I wanted to provide for her. And I knew like funerals was not something I can keep doing.
Right.
Because the emotional toll, and it's just like one of the, it's not like active guard reserve, which is what I eventually retired as. But it's active duty time, but it's not something you can retire from. But either way, I met my wife, married her in 2010, and which was smack dab in the middle of my time doing funerals. And when I met her, she kind of put me on the right track, I guess. And I knew that I wanted to keep her and wanted to keep her in my life. And I wanted to have a good life for her, and I wanted to have kids with her, and which we do now. So I eventually went to school and graduated from Spring Arbor, where we went to church. And I somehow found out about Spring Arbor through going to the church. I forget exactly how, but I ended up graduating from my bachelor's in business science in 2013. And then from that, I knew Spring Arbor, where I went, was like a satellite campus, so everybody knew each other. And I kept asking them about like a master's program. And like right when I graduated with my bachelor's, I remember seeing people walk across the stage with their masters, and like, I'm going to do that. Yeah. so it like literally is almost like God planned it. I think God did plan it, or believe God did plan it. And there was a master's in business course immediately following, and they all told me, and what I've read, like, keep going because it's harder if you take a break to come back. So it's like, all right, I'll just do it.
Right.
So I would work during the day and do my classes at night. My master's degree was a lot harder than my bachelor's degree by a lot. But I ended up graduating with my master's in business in 2015, and I was hired for recruiting in 2015. So I remember I went to the board, and like a month prior to that, I finished, but I hadn't graduated yet. So when I remember going to the board and saying, when I applied, I didn't have my master's degree. I didn't complete it yet. And I'm now complete, which I think will definitely help me get hired into a recruiting spot. So from honor guard to recruiting, I went to Sterling Heights is where I accepted the position. So Sterling Heights, Michigan. And that was on the east side of Detroit, is on Hall and Shaner, if you're familiar with the area, right across from Lakeside Mall. Mm-hmm. The areas I had Rochester Hills. Oakland University was like my big school, which is very military friendly. And while I was in Sterling Heights, I won a couple trips. Recruiting had some trips. I went to Hawaii and took my wife Lauren at the time, and I won a trip to Alaska. While we were prior to me going to Sterling Heights, I did have my son Logan, and that was like about, I want to say he was a little 1.5, when we moved. Mm-hmm. So June 4th, 2014, my son Logan David Brooks was born in Jackson, and we eventually moved to Sterling Heights. While I was stationed in Sterling Heights, my youngest son, Isaac Lyndon Brooks, was born March 22nd, 2017. And that was... So we lived in Macomb. We lived in a house pretty much on 25 in Romeo Plank. So like northern Macomb. Yeah. And we were there for 3 years. And then we eventually, while I was there, my mom passed away. And my mother-in-law passed away about 3 years before that. So we decided that we wanted to be around the area was amazing. I pretty much worked all of northern Detroit, Romeo, Washington, all the way to Macomb. So that whole area, Lake Orion, Oxford. I had Oxford for a while. I had the opportunity to move back closer to Jackson, so we'd be closer to family. And they moved me from Sterling Heights to Farmington Hills. And while I was there, I had pretty much Walled Lake, Novi, Northville, Royal Oak. So pretty much like just I went from the east side of Detroit to like the west side of Detroit, which is a big difference in demographic for recruiting. And we lived in Heartland, which is where we still live. And it was about a 25-minute drive-ish. But I worked with, I still communicate for Sterling Heights. I worked with a guy named Eric Thibodeau, who I still talk to every now and then. In Farmington Hills, I worked with Derek Gallegos and Jamie Wheeler, Chris Vetter, who's probably one of my good. He is one of my good friends. I communicate with him quite a bit. I play hockey with him. He also lives in Heartland, but so from Farmington Hills, I was there for like 2 years, and then I was kind of thinking like, I wanted to talk to my wife about it quite a few times. I wanted to retire because about that time I was starting to plan for it.
Right.
And when you retire, it's not like retiring is hard. Like I know I brought up earlier, like, as a recruiter, you talk to these kids and they're like scared to come in because they're scared what's going to happen. What if I get deployed? And all those things could happen. And as a recruiter, I never lied to them about it. Like you could deploy.
Oh yeah.
You could be shot at. You could be killed. That's a possibility. And I would never lie to a parent because I didn't want them to think that I was lying to them. Or not believe me or not trust me.
Yeah. And
I would say like when I remember in Sterling Heights when I had a recruit that I still communicate with, he just graduated this past month. I've had a couple, like call me, they were building trust was something I was pretty good at. And just cause I'm honest, I don't want to mislead anyone to think something wrong. Mm-hmm. And I, at that point, had been in, like, you come into recruiting, and I don't know what it was like in the Navy, but for us in the National Guard, like, you'll come in there, and there's a lot of people who've been in recruiting their whole career. And they came in there as an E4, and here I am as an E6 staff sergeant at the time, and had been for almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I would come there, and most of them had started in recruiting as an E4. And I remember like a lot of them would they didn't have the experience that I had. So I was really good at being able to tell the story.
Right.
About, this is what it would look like. And I could tell the difference between the Army or the Guard. Mm-hmm. Like these are the two differences. This is kind of what your day would look like in the Army opposed to the Guard. And having experience in it, at that point, I've been in artillery units, I've been in corrections, I'd been funeral honors. I pretty much had hired most of the people and did all the background stuff for anybody who was hired in the funeral honors. I was in a unit as logistics, just logistics operations. I wasn't very good at logistics.
You had the experience, though.
I had the experience. I went through the course, but I just wasn't a logistics person. I could do logistics like supply chain, but not like moving trucks and knowing what each sides of the bed was and all that stuff. I just wasn't very good at it. But having that experience in multiple units made me a better recruiter and being able to relate to parents, because I also was a parent, and I had a lot of experience where a lot of like the E4s who came there, mm-hmm. they didn't have any unit experience. They came there as an E4, they'd been in one unit, and that's all they've ever seen. And I'm not knocking them, everybody has their own journey, but being able to relate and to different scenarios, and there's 100 to 150 different positions that you could qualify for in the Army, and they're being able to relate to quite a few of them, mm-hmm. or getting an idea of what it was, helped me become a better recruiter, and it helped me gain trust. And again, like I still talk to quite a few of my recruits, and I felt like I was pretty approachable to the point where if they were on the edge, they could call me and they know that I would answer. And I'd be there if they needed me to be there. So,
which is important as a recruiter, right? There's the getting people to join the military part,
yeah.
But there's that other part of taking care of people, and answering their questions and helping them when they're afraid of something, and being there. I think that some people think the recruiter just calls, signs people up, and then moves on to the next person, but that's not necessarily so. If you're doing it the right way, people are calling you even after they've joined.
Mm-hmm. It's you're not getting someone to join it's not really a job. It's a lifestyle.
Right.
And it's a unity, camaraderie. Like that's what you're getting people to join for. I mean, like I said, like I had people from Cuba that if I see them, I'll sit there and have a 10, 15-minute conversation about how they're doing, and they're the same back.
Yeah.
It's that camaraderie is very important, and trust, and
Well, and for every person that joins the military, there's a separate story as to why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone joins for education. Not everyone joins because they want to be in the military. Not everyone joins because they dig the uniform. I mean, there's like, for the hundreds of thousands of people who join the military, there's hundreds of thousands of reasons why they join. Some are similar and some are not. But if you don't have life experience, it's really difficult to figure out what is it that this person is looking for. And for some people, joining the military is not the right thing. And that's an important thing to know as a recruiter.
Yes, it is very important.
So you recruited for how many years then?
7.
7? Okay. And you gained enough time and experience to retire. And anyone who's ever retired out of the military knows that not only is that fear about getting out, because I remember when I retired, but it is not easy to retire either. Just the paperwork. I mean, you have to plan ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just walk in like in your civilian job and go, hey, in June, I'm going to retire. There's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. And like all your medical documents, having those ready. And you know, like I just remember that. So I worked in Farmington Hills, and I remember that I coached my son Logan's soccer team, and I would have coached my son Isaac too, but he wasn't old enough yet. And I remember he had 7 games his first time playing like on a team, and I missed 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I was kind of at that point where, you know what, I have enough time in. If someone says the wrong thing to me, I might just drop my letter. And I think, you know, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that kind of worked that way.
Yeah.
But I remember that happened, and then they moved me to Howell to be a station commander. And then like the wrong thing was said to me, and I just kind of said, you know what, I'm just going to retire. And then I still helped out with what I could, but I retired. And I think my leadership was really good to me when I got out. They let me do what I need to do to retire, which I'm very grateful for. But getting the medical docs, I mean, when you're retiring, like I'm applying for jobs and like you have no clue what to do. Like, oh, I got to switch every resume to keywords for this specific job. And, you know, I look back and I'm really glad that I got my bachelor's and my master's while I was in, because I know people who are getting out now that don't have that. And
it's very helpful. I want to ask, what was it like the last day of putting on the uniform, knowing that this time that I take this uniform off, I'm not going to put it on again? How'd that feel?
So mine happened a little weird. So I had a ton of terminal leave. So I had a bunch of leave that I didn't use while I was in.
Right.
And so when I really didn't do anything from like December till like I was hired at Consumers Energy. And I would come in, like if I had nothing to do, like I would come in and help out. There was a couple new people that would come. I'd go do a presentation at a school classroom, or I'd go to like a lunchroom visit where you go sit in the lunchroom and talk to kids, which I enjoyed that part of recruiting.
Yeah.
But when I retired, I went to Fort Knox, and my wife, Lauren, Logan, and Isaac, my two sons, came with me, which was super awesome because, you know, it's my last time. Like I'm signing out on leave to be out of the military. And they came with me. And I remember the feeling after I got my last piece of paper that like I felt good. Like it felt good. Like it was like it's like a really weird feeling. Like I almost felt lost in a good way, like lost and excited. And we went, I remember outside of Fort Knox, there's like this little like village type thing, like for old buildings, like settlers buildings, like people who first came to America. So we drove back, and there's these houses that we wanted to go look at. And then some guy's like walking past there, and he's like, "You guys should go down there. It's like it's a big drop, and there's a bunch of waterfalls and stuff." And I remember like that whole time, I'm like just kind of trying to get through, like looking at these houses and like trying to figure out my feelings.
Right.
And then we went down this gulch, and I don't know if you've been to Fort Knox.
I have not.
Yeah, well, if you ever do, go down. It's like right outside the gate. We go down this drop, and there's like a edge going down, and like in a weird way that like helped my feelings at that point in time. And then we went and we saw all these streams and these waterfalls, and my kids were playing in it. And I look at them like, this is why I'm getting out. So I remember like thinking like, oh, I don't have to go to drill weekend anymore.
Right.
You know, so I'm going to get to do this.
I'm not going to have something to do every time someone has a wedding or a birthday or something. It seemed like that was drill weekend. Right?
Yeah. And I remember like I remember watching my kids in the stream, like throw rocks and wade in there. And I remember it just being like, I don't have to go to drill. So I was like going through all these emotions, like watching them do it. And like, it kind of reminded me why I dropped while I'm retiring. So.
Well, I think as parents, especially as military parents, we carry a lot of needless guilt about the things that we didn't do for our kids. And my kids are all out of the house, but I'll share this with you that when they get older, they don't really remember that. You're the one that remembers all of it, and I know this is your interview, but I'll share this story with you. My son, when he was little, always wanted to go see James and the Giant Peach. And I always had something else I had to do. I was always working, or I had, I was in the military, whatever. I always had something else I had to do. And, after I got out of the military and, actually he got out of the military, I always carried, every time I saw that damn commercial for James and the Giant Peach on TNT or whatever station it was on, I felt guilty, like to the point where I wanted to cry because I had cheated my kid out of this movie. Yeah. And so I called him, and I said, "Hey, Aaron, I just want to say, I'm really sorry. I know you really wanted to see James and the Giant Peach when you were a kid. I went through this whole thing." And he kind of laughed at me. He's like, "Dad, for the love of God, like James and the Giant Peach, I don't even remember wanting to see that movie. But if you really want to see it, we'll watch it together." So I was the one carrying that guilt. Like, he had totally forgotten about it. Like, it hadn't even impacted his life the way that it had impacted mine. So I think a lot of the guilt we carry, especially as military parents, our kids don't. No one's pushing that on us but us. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I think that's how that happens. And so you get out. It sounds like this was kind of a good, what's that word? Cathartic experience for you, knowing that you've made the right choice. So what's next for Brian Brooks? So that happened, and like I thought that was going to be my last time putting on the uniform. But a week prior to me going to Knox to my final out process, I had a luncheon at B-Dubs and Howell, and like my commander came, and who was Jared Johnson. And then Jason Arell was my E8 at the time. And all my friends I hung out with, so like Chris Vetter, Jamie Wheeler, a ton of other people came, Eric Thibodeau. And at that point, I had my lunch, and he was like, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I'm like, "Not really." I mean, then he, like, for some reason, I overheard him talking about doing this flight with the University of Michigan football team. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, you know what? If you could get me on that flight for retirement, I would really appreciate it. He's like, done. So my last time actually wearing the uniform, I was in Grand Ledge, and I got on the flight, and I remember Mike Morris, which was an edge for University of Michigan football last year. And he was drafted last week. I forget. I think he went to Seattle. I can't remember. I'm probably, don't quote me on that. But we went from Grand Ledge, and we flew all the way around Michigan Stadium. And I'm like, if I was going to go out and wear my uniform the last time, this day was perfect. Because I'm a Michigan football fan. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, Jared Johnson did an awesome job with that event. I remember, and him inviting me I was grateful for it. But it was like, I still have videos of it.
Yeah.
And, I remember I talked to Mike Sanristil. I'm probably saying his name wrong, but he was on my flight as well. And it's crazy because you're on this flight with these football players, and they're huge. A lot of them are huge, like they're linemen, but the ones who are receivers or D-backs or any of that, they're not very big. They're like a little bit bigger than me. They're taller than me, but they're like thinner than me.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're sitting there talking to them, and you're like, man, you don't know, like you don't, it doesn't register who they are until
they're regular people.
They're just like you and me.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing experience. That team they were all like so supportive of the military. And I remember like, it was just a great experience to have my last day of wearing my uniform. I got to wear it with the University of Michigan Wolverines, who were Big Ten title champions that year. So, but after that day, I started working for Consumers Energy as a data translator, in May. So like 10 years after I signed out, or 10 days, sorry, after I signed out from Fort Knox, I started my position with Consumers Energy, and it was remote. Mm-hmm. And, which is really weird, going from, coming to the office and to be like I would have preferred to be hybrid, but like remote when you're getting out, like, oh, I don't ever have to leave. And then like you don't ever leave, and you're like, man, I need to leave.
Right.
like I got to figure out some place to go every day so I can just get out of the house. And I started with Consumers Energy. I have a ton of friends there that I worked with. I have, so I did data translator. So basically for the marketing department, I would determine like what data was to a marketing manager or marketing coordinator. And I enjoyed what I did. I don't think I really got that great at it. It was different. Like we looked at data in the military. Mm-hmm. The data I looked at was either for like funeral honors or recruiting, like a demographic for recruiting, like that kind of data, where it was somewhat similar, but there was like the amount of customers you're looking at is like 2.67 million compared to like I've never worked with an Excel spreadsheet that big before.
Yes.
So, but I had a mentor that I still talk to every now and then, a couple of them. Patty Chapman, or Fowler now, she helped me like with my resume to apply for other jobs. She helped me with a lot of like data stuff with Excel spreadsheet, like pivot tables and stuff like that.
Right.
And my whole team was good. I mean, I can't say like they were great. So I worked for Consumers Energy. So Patty, a guy named Avi, and Yassine, though they were pretty important in me coming in. They helped me out quite a bit. And then eventually I'm no longer with Consumers Energy. So I was there for just under a year. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot while I was there about utilities and a lot about data. So now I coach both my kids soccer and hockey, and that's what I wake up to do, and that's what I love to do. And I look back at my time in service, and I think like I'm so proud of what I've done. Mm-hmm. I look back, and it's just kind of like I'm so glad that was my journey, and it's made me so much of what I am today. And I'm really, really proud of it. And, if I could say anything as a final note, I just want my kids to know that, my wife to know that. Or anybody who would listen to this mm-hmm. later on in life, that I would never have changed it. I loved it. And most of the time, I would have never changed my journey. And, just like do what you're passionate about. And like when I'd wake up most days, I felt good about what I was getting ready to go do, especially with funerals. I know that might sound strange in a way, but when I would go do a funeral, I was pretty good at it. Our teams were really good at it. They were easy and great to work with. And, I learned so much from so many people I've worked with. And, like as a recruiter, I'd always tell people that, we give you all these benefits. The military will give you all these benefits, but it's not the benefits that are great. It's the people that you're going to work with and the experiences that you're going to have. And I think that I had a really good experience with my time in service.
Yeah. Well, and it's obvious from the way that you talk about it. I think there's a lot of stuff in here that future generations are definitely going to be able to take away from your life story. And I appreciate you taking the time out this afternoon to talk about this, even the hard things. But I think those are important for everyone. Before we go, though, is there any other message you'd like people to take away from our conversation today?
Do what you're passionate about. Because if you're doing that, you're going to wake up and you don't feel like you're working.
And that's the magic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brian.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Veterans Archives, the podcast that brings you the story of the men and women who have created and lived our military history. If you or someone you know served in the military and would like to share your story with Veterans Archives, please go to www.veteransarchives.org, select the Apply Now button, and fill out our application, and someone will get right back with you. Veterans Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we rely on the donations of our listeners. If you are enjoying these stories and you support our efforts, please go to www.veteransarchives.org and select the Donate button. Any donation is certainly appreciated. Look for Veterans Archives on your favorite social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for Veterans Archives. Like, follow, and share our page. We'd certainly appreciate it. If you or someone you know is a veteran and you are struggling with mental health issues, please dial 988 and select option 1 for the Veterans Crisis Hotline. Please be sure to tune in next time for the next episode of Veterans Archives.